I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you for joining us for these lessons on state public record laws and the Federal Freedom of Information Act. This is the fourth round of lessons that all build on one another. First, we discussed the law itself, what it covers and how it can be used. Then, we invited a local journalist to share 3 specific requests they made and the stories that resulted. Our previous round of lessons focused on the appeals process, what to do when your request is denied. And now we again have a local journalist to share their experience using the appeals process to obtain records for their reporting. Links to all videos, as well as other valuable information, can be found at nefac.org/FOI guide. This round of lessons is brought to you by NEFAC with support from the Rhode Island Foundation, the SPJ Foundation, MuckRock, SPJ New England, and the New England Society of News Editors. Thank you again for joining us. Now, here's NEFAC's Emily Sweeney to introduce you to your instructor.
Hey everybody, I'm Emily Sweeney from the Boston Globe, and I want to thank you all for joining us for this webinar, which is part of our ongoing series on public records laws. With us is Len Besthoff. He's the Chief Investigative Reporter for NBC Connecticut, and he's going to explain how his newsroom appealed a public records request denial and the stories that resulted. Len, thank you so much for doing this.
Well, we are just thrilled and flattered that you would include us in this. And thank you so much, Emily. And it sounds like you've got quite a few stories to share as well. But I guess tonight's us.
Oh, yeah.
And we have had quite a journey here and that we're about to tell you about. But I do want to sort of step back a little and give you the 30,000-foot view. I've been a reporter in Connecticut a long time. And I have seen the arc of our state police and our just relationship with police in general in Connecticut when it comes to information. And I've got to say that in general, the Connecticut media has quite a good relationship with police departments. It's touch and go. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. But I would say in general, I've seen things progress. So this instance we're going to be telling you about is regarding the Connecticut State Police. And in particular with the state police, the relationship can at times be strained, but it has improved generally, like I said. So when I came back to Connecticut a long, long time ago, around the turn of the century, in the 21st century, that is, they were still sending out press reports on fax. They would not give out mugshots. They would not, even when an officer was found to be doing some misconduct that had gone through an IA and they had concluded that in fact it had happened, they wouldn't even give us a trooper's photo when they started with the agency. And it's gotten a lot better since then. They have embraced some electronic file sharing. They are more active on social media, not necessarily exactly how we'd like it, where it would really be efficient for us, but it certainly is better. But we do have steps forward and we have steps back. And that takes us to 2019. In May of 2019, the State Police Union was working on getting a new contract, and they got one. And they were negotiating with the state. And what they got in there was a very interesting provision. In Connecticut, we're one of the few states that allows collective bargaining contracts to supersede certain parts of state law. And in this case, the State Police Union came up with a contract with negotiations that got them certain provisions that allowed them to supersede our state's FOI law. Now, this FOI law had been set up years and years ago. We were one of the first states with one back in 1972. Our first female governor, Ella Grasso, set that up, along with a really good system where we have an FOI commission that will go through and hear all these cases that you can file a complaint. You don't even have to be an attorney to do so. But in this case, this contract precluded a number of tenets of the FOI statute in Connecticut. So what it did was it said that unless a trooper had his or her misconduct IA, internal affairs investigation, with a finding of misconduct, unless it was that, we had no ability to ever get any of the documentation. So if the claim was unfounded, if it was just there wasn't enough evidence and so the case was dropped, that would not be anything that any of us could get. In addition, this new contract allowed the state troopers to have the right of refusal if we even wanted to get basic, and I mean basic personnel records, training, dates of hire, things like that, commendations, obviously discipline, which is what we're after a lot of times. So this went into effect in May of 2019. And there was some conversation about it. Some legislators on both sides of the aisle had pause with this and raised questions about transparency. But in the end, it was voted into law and signed by the governor. The legislators claimed that, well, while it was a contract that they voted upon, they really had nothing to do with the negotiations. So it was either up or down, and most of them said up. The state troopers had not been working with the contract for quite some time. And I think there was quite an impetus to get it done, even though there were these concerns about FOI. And the real concern also with that was because the state legislators were basically voting up or down, there were no hearings on this. It was sort of done very quietly, and a lot of people would have liked to have had something to say about it, and they didn't. So then it comes to October, and we get our first real opportunity to test this here at NBC Connecticut. There were several FOI requests made by other media outlets as well. But this was our first crack at it. It was about 4 months later. In September of 2019, there was a state trooper named John McDonald. He was a sergeant. And he went to a retirement party for a fellow trooper at a brewery, Black Hog Brewery, I believe it was in Oxford, Connecticut. And after about 3 hours, he left. And he, according to police reports, went through a stop sign. Right before he went through that stop sign, he was driving as fast as 71 miles per hour, according to police reports. And he T-boned a mother and her daughter who had just come back from getting ice cream, and they both got hurt. McDonald was taken from the scene by state troopers and brought to a hospital where he refused treatment, and he never got any kind of blood test. So certainly this raised some curiosity with us, as well as every other media organization in the state. I was not on the story. We have a fantastic general assignment reporter named Caitlin Birchall, who also does a lot of enterprise and investigations on the side with us. She had just come to us from KSL in Utah and wasn't as familiar with our FOI statutes. And so it was thought that I might be the better one to go in and just sort of see what we could get, knowing the situation in terms of, again, this superseding contract, and just from dealing with FOI and the FOI Commission before, in terms of appearing before them and having cases. So it was my turn, and to try to see what I could do with this contract and see if we could get any kind of daylight, so to speak. So I made the FOI request asking for his personnel jacket and disciplinary records. The way it works in Connecticut, as it does in many states, you have a certain amount of time where you have to acknowledge the request. In Connecticut, it's 4 days. In this case, the overarching agency over the Connecticut State Police, the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, sent me something right back. I mean, that day said, received, we got it, good to go. Okay, so I'm thinking, all right, we're doing okay. You know, I'll wait a little while, we'll see what we get. I waited a month. I didn't hear boo from the Connecticut State Police or the DESPP. So I did a follow-up and I said, hey, what's going on? We're just curious about our request. And they got back to me in a few days. And they said, hey, you know, you're probably aware that there is this new contract in which there is this supersedence of the state's FOI statutes, and you're probably not going to be able to get anything. Okay. I didn't respond to that. I just, got some good counsel from a group I'm involved with, a transparency group in Connecticut called the Connecticut Foundation for Open Government. And I also spoke with some folks over at CCFOI, which is the organization here, the Connecticut Coalition for Freedom of Information. And they actually do lobbying at the state capitol, and we're somewhat involved in what had happened in terms of trying to blow the whistle on this contract that a lot of people thought really wasn't fair when it came to access when it comes to the public. So I consulted with them. I also consulted with a very unique person that we have here in Connecticut. And this is, again, what's really great about our state is we have this FOI commission that has someone called an ombudsman. His name is Tom Hennick. He is a former newspaper reporter, but don't think for a second that he's in the tank for us, because he's not. He will help anybody. So whether it's myself, whether it's an attorney who's making an FOI request, a member of the public, offenders who are incarcerated, who in many cases are making FOI requests. Also, the people who are on the receiving end of these complaints, they will consult them too. Tom will consult them, and he'll go do training at their facilities. So at one point I had filed some complaints about a fire commission here, and they got jammed up quite a bit, frankly. And he went to them and gave them hour-long training and all kinds of things like that to try to make sure that they understood things better. So I know Tom on a first-name basis. I see him all the time. I sent him an email saying, you know, what can we do here? Is there anything? And Tom consulted with the FOIC attorneys who told him, no, this is pretty ironclad. There's no daylight here. Len, you really don't have a shot at getting anything. That rarely deters us in our business, as you know. And what was galling, though, frankly, in many ways, was that, now remember, we made the request in October, okay? We heard back that day. They said, yeah, we got it. Then a month later, I check in. They're like, oh, yeah, we're working on it. Or, you know, we've got this statute, so, or we've got this contract, so we don't know that we're going to be able to give you anything. I had to wait till February when the agency got back and said, no, Sergeant McDonald does not want to give you his records. So October, made the request. November, checked in. They said, you're probably not getting anything. Then February, so we're now at 4 months, maybe even 4 to 5 months. And we're just hearing that the trooper says, no, you can't have it. We're not going to let you have it. So again, we talked with the FOIC. They said, nope, he's within his rights. And so now it's time to file a complaint. And I've got to say that our complaint was pretty strongly worded, because we just feel at NBC Connecticut that even if you take this whole contract that they got out of the equation, it's still pretty baked in the process that it's going to take a while. Because you can see here, I mean, this, in our belief, was a little bit on the abusive side in terms of how long it took just to get back on pretty rudimentary questions. And so we felt that it was baked in already, and now you're putting in this extra roadblock and this extra delay. And the truth of the matter is, according to the president of the state police union, he said that the reason they put this provision in the contract wasn't for the media. They had no problem with us. It was for all these, as they call it, nuisance lawsuits, which there are. I mean, where people who feel that officers wronged them will file FOI requests to get all kinds of information and then put that out publicly. As you've probably heard, you know, jailhouse attorneys, as they're called, people who are offenders and are incarcerated, who have time to research the law and do and know it pretty well in some cases. They were making a lot of requests. And what I always hear from keepers of the records, whether it's with the state or in municipalities, is that attorneys make voluminous requests. And frankly, that the media is the least of their issues. So I wrote that complaint, and I just felt that, and we as an organization felt that it really was in bad faith. in the way that the Connecticut State Police were just trying to shut everybody out and make this process even longer and more laborious. And certainly it was. So things moved along. We got our complaint filed, and then about a month after that, the whole COVID crisis begins. So now we've got this whole other problem because the FOIC was still holding its hearings, but now they're virtual. And as you know, in the case of many hearings, whether they're government hearings or whatever, they tend to go a little bit longer when they're virtual. I'm not sure why, but they tend to. And so it totally extended out the process even further. The FOIC got further and further backed up. And so now we are at about 1 year almost since this whole thing happened, or 6 months. And then the whole George Floyd incident happens in May of 2020. We're at a standstill in our FOI case. We're nowhere. The George Floyd incident happens, and the state legislature in Connecticut says, well, we're going to work on police accountability like they did in many states. And one of the first things they went after was this new state police contract. And they just said this provision with FOI cannot stand. And so they passed state law that basically said that this thing that exempted all these records could not hold any further. So that put things in motion a little bit, you would think. It didn't really. The state police union in August of 2020 sued the state regarding this police accountability law and this FOI provision. And then in October of 2020, so now we're at 1 year. We're at 1 year from when we made our original FOI request and then subsequent complaint. We got a hearing date for November 9th. The one thing that also was going on here was that we were still waiting, and November 9th hadn't come yet, but on November 3rd, we hear from Sergeant McDonald that he's dropped his objection. We were all ready to go. We were ready to go do the hearing. We had our arguments laid out, but then he dropped his objection to us getting these records. And we tried to find out why the state had this objection. We couldn't get a clear answer, but what we had to surmise was even though he had every right to block them, because at the time we made the request, you know, that law was in effect. He was grandfathered in, but I'm sure, you know, in talking with all these other people involved in this FOIC and other attorneys and people I've been talking about with, you know, First Amendment groups, what they told me was, you know, you could just rescind that and refile the request and they'd have to honor it because there's now this new law in effect. So that's the belief that's why the state police, only when the hearing got on the docket and they realized we weren't going anywhere, we were going to have this hearing, that's when they realized, I guess, that they were going to have a loss and they weren't going to go through with it. I have sources that have told me that certain members of the brass were urging Sergeant McDonald to let us look at these documents, but there was some holdup, and my sources didn't know what that was all about. So we got the records. The truth is, he really had a pretty clean record. And again, I gave all these documents to Caitlin Burchell. She looked at them. That's the reporter who was doing the story, and she really thought that they didn't add that much to the story. She might have had a little bit in there, but not too much from these records. They were pretty much a formality, but we got them, which was good. It just took a while. It took a year, which I guess we've had longer FOI cases. I know anyone watching this probably has dealt with longer ones, but it was just the nature of this one that was very strange with this contract that blocked us. The one thing is, though, that we still got an FOI win here, because Burchell was smart, she's a great reporter, and she had a source that told her, here's what you really need to make sure you're first in line for it. Make sure you FOI the surveillance video from the brewery where Sergeant McDonald was drinking. You're going to see a lot. And she stayed on top of that, and we got a great exclusive because she had that video exclusively that night, the first night we got it, and it showed him buying 8 beverages. It also showed him getting other ones. It showed him stumbling. And it really, I think, gave viewers a much clearer picture of what happened there, especially when you consider that he was taken from the scene by state police, and he didn't have a blood test at the hospital because he didn't get any medical care. In the end, Sergeant McDonald, took a deal, alcohol education program, 2-year probation. He ended up resigning. It seemed like it was at the urging of the police union and the CSP. That was after quite a bit of admin duty, but he did end up resigning. And this case, though, still is technically alive because the state police appealed all the way to the federal appeals court, this rescinding of this provision of the contract. And just, I believe it was this month, that the federal appeals court said, no, the state is within its rights. But the truth is that the state police do have a pretty good case here because supersedence is allowed in Connecticut. So they did it, within the bounds of the law, with the exception, a lot of these cases are saying it was intent and it was what they were trying to do versus, that they were doing it in a proper way, where the law covered it. So it's possible if they do appeal, and they're saying they may, that there could be a win down the line. You just never know. But at least in this case, we did get the records, but it was a struggle. And I got to say, as a reporter, I've never run into something like this where a law enforcement agency actually got their contract to supersede state law. That blew us away. And of course, as soon as we got the opportunity to contest it, we wanted to. And that's our story.
That was really eye-opening. And it's so great that you guys pursued it. What's the longest FOI case that you've been involved in down there in Connecticut?
Right when I started at NBC Connecticut, we had a case where a woman, unfortunately with mental issues, drove to the U.S. Capitol. You may remember this. I believe it was during Obama, and she led Secret Service on a chase after she tried to get through some barriers at the White House. You remember this?
Yes, it does ring a bell.
And I believe it was U.S. Secret Service. We made some requests for documents connected to this woman. I believe I got it after 3 or 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's better late than never.
Exactly.
Persistence and patience is key. So we do have one question from an audience member. Kate is asking, do you have any advice for young journalists who might feel intimidated about using the FOI law?
Okay, 2 or 3 things there, Kate. One, as we say when we're doing the traffic reports here, you got to pack your patience. Just, like Emily and I are talking about here, it could be a year or years before you get some of these things. And the more reps you get, the better you get at doing them and expediting the process. The other big thing is talk to the reporters in your newsroom who do these things. Because like in this case, any investigative unit in any newsroom, they're always helping the general assignment people. At least everyone that I've worked in, that's part of your mission is, you're lucky that you're not on the streets every day. And if somebody else needs something that day, that's what we're here to do. And go to those reporters with more experience and let them shepherd you through the process. And just try it. What do you got to lose, except getting a no?
Len, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. We are flattered that you would ask us to help. And any other time we can, please give us a ring.
Excellent. Will do. All right. Thanks, everybody.